Previously on This Is Us.
That Jesus is the safest place for real people with real problems, with real lives, and with real questions.
We had raised these great kids, had a business that was successful, and then everything crashed like a house of cards.
But what I saw was that when I changed, everything else changed too. So I became more gracious and forgiving, and Jeff and our marriage got stronger, and I became a better mom. And so in the end, I think the best thing for her was the change in me.
And he just let me ask questions, real questions, hard questions.
Keen, who has Jesus ever really changed? And if you know his background, he's got a
Seminary.
Yeah, I'm not equipped to argue the Bible with my husband. But what I said to him was, I just looked at him and I said, you know what, Jesus changed me.
That even though we're not ideal, even though we're a mess sometimes, even though I make mistakes that hurt others, even though others have hurt me, even though the world is a mess, that we have discovered that Jesus runs toward us, no matter who the us is.
My name is Josh Grunewald. I'm calling from South Africa, just to tell you a little bit about my story. I grew up in a Christian home, but what's the point of calling it Christian if the actions don't really follow? God was talked about, but the picture that I got was pretty broken. There was little love and eventually a lot of rejection. This ended up with me being a 14-year-old kid that did some stupid things, and instead of being told by my mother to go to my room, she told me that it would have been better if I wasn't born.
That's my little brother. He's 10 years younger than me, and that was a call that I made to him on Skype. You may have seen my face in the bottom corner there, a little weird, a little awkward. But I asked him if we could share his story as part of This Is Us. And what we've been doing in the series is taking an honest look at ourselves and realizing that there's no one ideal. Not one of us is ideal. We don't live up to our own ideals. That all of us have a little bit of brokenness in us and in our story. And I thought it would be appropriate to share some of his story. And the reason I want to share some of his story is because my story is very much intertwined with his story. And as I share some of his story, you can get to know me a little bit. You can get to know my story, kind of what eventually landed me here where I'm at and some of the influences in my life. But there's a bigger reason I wanted to share some of his story. And that is this, that his story and the fact that I was able to be a part of his story, and me and my wife as well, that we were able to be a part of his story in a really interesting, unique, hard, amazing way, has impacted us tremendously. It has honestly changed the way that I see life, that it's the way I see relationships, the way we see our interactions with others and what can come of that. And the reason I want to share it is because that has changed me, but I hope that as you see some of this story, hear this story today, that it could also allow you to see your interactions with people differently, and the potential impact that you can have on those around you. So I want to share a little bit about the story of Josh. Josh was born, I was about 9 years old when Josh was born on June 15th. Now, the reason I tell you his birth date, June 15th, is because his birth date, there he is, his birth date was the same day as his dad's birthday. And I say his dad because his dad was not my dad. My parents had been divorced just a little bit before Josh's dad married my mom. And then Josh was born from that relationship. Now, usually, if you're a kid and you have your dad's birthday, if you're a little boy and you have your dad's birthday, that's like, sweet, this is awesome, right? I got my dad's birthday. This is amazing. I love it. I'm excited. Yeah, we share something. I feel closer to my dad. Usually that's a good thing. But for Josh, it wasn't. For Josh, it was one of the most painful things that he experienced, and here's why. Because when Josh was a baby, his dad left. His dad divorced my mom, so he hardly even remembers anything about his dad. By the time he was 2, he was gone and nowhere to be found. Never had any contact with Josh, never had any phone calls, never had anything to do with him. And so every year when Josh's birthday would come round, it would be a time when you're hoping to, it's going to be awesome. My birthday, let's celebrate my birthday. It'll be a happy moment. I mean, we all love to celebrate our birthdays, right? Today we can focus on us, but for Josh, it wasn't just that. There was always this pang of hurt. There was always this loss. There was always this hole because he remembered that his dad's birthday was the same day. And so what Josh would do every birthday, every June 15th, Josh would try and call his dad because his dad never called, never sent a gift, never sent a card. So Josh would try to call him to say, "Happy birthday, Dad," in hopes that his dad would say, "Happy birthday to you too, son." And every year he would try, and sometimes he would get hold of him, and sometimes he wouldn't, until one year when he made that phone call. This is what he heard on the other end of the line.
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service. If you feel you have reached this recording in error, please check the number and try your call again.
His dad had disconnected the number that Josh had because he wanted to disconnect completely from who Josh was. We found out that Josh's dad had done this before, had a relationship with someone else, had 2 little girls, I believe, left them, got married to my mom, had Josh, left him, but he wanted nothing to do with Josh. Now, can you imagine as a child calling his dad, wanting to wish him happy birthday, wanting to invite him in, and hearing that message? The question I have is this: what does that do to a person? And even bigger, what does that do to a child in a moment where, all you want is dad? It's my birthday. What does it do to a child knowing that his dad had pushed him away and literally cut off any contact because I don't want to know you? It's painful. It's a burden. It's something. So Josh's life didn't start very well. By the time he was 2, he was gone. But what do you do? You kind of have to carry on, right? And kids are resilient, and so they move on and they try to figure this out and go. And our little family try to figure life out. Now, my mom had now been through 2 divorces, and there were 4 kids at home, so she's a single mother of 4 trying to figure this out. By the time Josh was 2 years old, we had moved in that period 5 times. Going from an apartment to my aunt and uncle's house because we didn't have anywhere to go, to a different home, all this, just so much chaos and so much mess, and this is the life that Josh started in. And then something wonderful happened, something that people make movies of. It's so great. My mom and my dad got back together again, and we were so ecstatic because this is awesome. Here's a wedding photo from that day. Don't laugh, but that's me. It's my older brother. There's Josh. Like I said, he's 10 years younger than me, 9-10 years. There's my sister and my parents. And we were so excited that this was going to fix all these problems, forget all the mess that was going on. It was going to be great. But somehow the mess in our family just always kept tripping us up. It just always kept messing things up because just a few years after that photo, they were separated and on their way to another divorce. I was 16 years old when that was happening, and Josh was 6. And they were, life and family had fallen apart again. My dad, in the separation, moved in with my brother into an apartment, and my mom and myself and my sister and Josh had to figure out what was going to happen now. Where were we going to go now? So Josh was 6 years old then, but he never stopped wanting to connect with his dad, obviously. Even though his dad had disconnected phones and said clearly, "I don't want to see you," he never stopped wanting to disconnect with them. And so one time, my mom actually, through different connections, found his dad and told him, "Hey, your son wants to meet you. Just take a little bit of time and meet with him, please." And he agreed. He agreed to meet with Josh and said, "We'll meet at this mall at a certain coffee shop next Saturday." And Josh was ecstatic. Josh was so excited. I mean, he couldn't wait. He's going to meet his dad for basically the first time. And so the day came, and he got dressed and got ready. "I'm going to meet Dad, I've got to look good." got in the car, went to the place, got there a little early and waited for the time to come. And when the time came, his dad didn't and never showed up again. And Josh waited and waited and waited. And his dad never came. Let me ask you again, what does that do to a person? What does that do to a child? What does that do to his heart when his dad is saying, I don't want you, and I'm going to make it as clear as possible? So our family was a mess. Josh's early childhood was a mess. And you'd think that was bad enough, but it was going to get a little worse from then still. We moved on again, tried to figure it out. But what I realized is that there were so many stressors happening in our family. When my parents got separated again for the second time, the third divorce was about to happen. There were so many other things happening as well that just stressed my mom out, and the relationship that was always struggling between her and her husbands now started petering out on her and the kids. And there was all the stress happening. One of the things that happened before they got divorced for the second time, my dad went bankrupt, and we didn't have any money. And I remember standing on the front lawn of our house, watching a truck pull up, take my mom's car onto the back of the truck and repossess it and take it away because we didn't have money. And then we lost our home. The bank took the home away, and we didn't have anywhere to go. And like I said, my dad and my older brother moved into an apartment, but the four of us, my mom, me, my sister, and Josh, had no place. We didn't know. 2 days before we had to be out of the house, we had no idea where we were going. And so my mom called a friend who she knew was going to be on vacation for 2 weeks. And she said, can we move into your house for 2 weeks? And so we moved into their house with all our stuff in their garage and stayed there for 2 weeks while they were on vacation. And when they came back, again, we had nowhere to go. We were homeless. Thankfully, we didn't land up on the street, but another friend said, you can stay in these 2 bedrooms we have at the back of our house, and you can live there for a few months. We stayed there for 6 months until my mom had enough to pay rent, at least. So it was a mess. It was a mess. When I was 19 and Josh was 9, I eventually moved out. But the tension in the home, like I said, was spilling over from all the mess. It was spilling over onto the relationships between my mom and the kids now. When my sister was 17, she's 4 years younger than me. When she was 17, they had a major conflict, and she moved out. She couldn't be at home anymore. So Josh was left alone at home now. And again, the tension could only go one way. And that's where what Josh said in that video happened. Because my take on the story, I don't know all the details, but my take on the story is that Josh was hanging out with some friends who were no good, and he was with them, and several of them shoplifted while they were at some store, and they were caught. Josh wasn't a part of that, but he was with them. And so all of them were arrested at 13 years old and taken down to the police station. They called my mom, and in the tension and the mess that she was sitting in, she came and she broke, and she freaked out, and she said those words to him, Josh, it would have been better if you were never born. What does that do to a person? What does that do to a child? His dad has rejected him, and now his mom is doing the same at 13. I called her because I had moved out. I was living in a different city trying to figure out life and trying to make life work. I'd started working in ministry and trying to figure all that out. But I called my mom and said, what's going on? What's happening? And she told me this. She said, I can't do this anymore, and I'm going to put Josh up for adoption. At 13, what does that do to a person? What does that do to a child? And so here I am sitting in this different city, 8 hours drive away, trying to figure out, what do I do? I can't do anything. Like I said, I've just started working. I was studying my bachelor's degree correspondence, so I didn't have a degree. I didn't have a real job. I say I didn't have a real job because I was working really hard, but they didn't pay me anything. I was working on this sort of leadership school for students who left high school and wanted to take a gap year and learn more about Jesus and potentially figure out what they want to do with their life. So I was working there, but that didn't pay anything. I got to live on campus for free, and I got food for free, but nothing more than that. I didn't have a home, didn't have a car, didn't have money, and here Josh is facing the greatest need that he would ever face. His mom has kicked him out, and his dad is nowhere to be found. No one will have his back. No one's there to take care of him. He has nowhere to go. And I'm looking at this going, what do I do? I don't have enough for myself. I barely have enough for myself. What can I do in this situation? There is nothing. I don't know how to help. I want to, but I don't know how. And that's the situation that we found ourselves in. And that's the situation that Josh, a 13-year-old kid, found himself in. I want to pause the story there for a little bit, and I want to go to and tell you another story that some of you may have heard before about another little boy who lived in the first century. And the reason I want to tell you this story is because I think this boy's story mirrors in some way what I was experiencing at that time when we discovered this incredible need that Josh had and realized that I had nothing to be able to give to help him. This little boy that I want to tell you about, through all this unique set of circumstances, actually met Jesus. As Jesus was teaching and as Jesus was doing what he did, and Jesus, if you don't know this, and if you are skeptical of Jesus, or if you have had problems with Christians, and therefore your picture of Jesus is a little skewed, I would encourage you to go and read the accounts of who Jesus was, because what you'll find is that Jesus was the most likable, attractive person that has ever lived, I believe. Everybody who came into contact with him liked him. It was amazing, except for the people who had their own agendas and wanted power and all that. But everybody else who were disenfranchised from religion, everybody else who were left by the wayside, orphans, broken people, diseased, sinners, everybody, they heard Jesus talk and they were like, wow, this man is different. This man is amazing. And so as a result, because of what he taught about God, which was so different and so unique, because of how he treated people and loved people and served people, everybody wanted to know him. Everybody wanted to connect with him. Everybody wanted to be close to him. And so thousands and thousands of people were flocking to him. And this boy found himself in the middle of one of these moments because Jesus was teaching in the countryside that day. And in the area, they'd heard Jesus is around. So everybody came out and they walked miles and miles and miles to get away from the city and the village and any place that they knew. And Jesus was out there, and they came out, and Jesus was teaching that day. And this boy was in the crowd. Eyewitnesses say, they counted basically how many people were there, and they would count the heads of households. And they said there were about 5,000 men, not counting women and children. Thousands of people were there. And then Jesus looked up, and it was the end of the day, and everybody had kind of been caught up in the excitement of Jesus and the teaching, and everybody was far away from town, far away from any food, and all of them were getting hungry and tired on that hot, hot day. And it started to become a problem. And that's where we find the situation where this boy is introduced to us. This boy was insignificant in all other ways except for this little moment where he interacted with Jesus. So I want to show you what happened. John, an eyewitness of what happened there, explains the situation. He says this: when Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, one of the guys who was with him, one of his disciples, one of the followers, he said, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? They're hungry, they need food. Where shall we buy bread?" And Philip answered and said this: "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have just a bite." Jesus, the need is immense. It is huge. There's no way we can meet this need. It's so, so big. And that's where we meet this little boy that I think mirrors the situation that I found myself in. We meet this boy. This is what happens. Another one of his disciples, Andrew, who was Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. He said, "Here's this boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But, come on, how far will they go among so many?" Here's this little boy who has a little, barely enough to feed him. It's the sandwich, and it's been in his little bag for the whole day, so it's probably a gross-smelling fish sandwich. We don't like fish sandwiches on a good day, usually. This has been there all day, and this little boy goes, "I got something. Look at the need. Look at how many people need. Look at the vast hugeness of this need. But I got something. I'm hungry. I need it for me. But I wonder if Jesus can do something with this. And the boy could have looked for the hungriest person in the crowd and gone up to him and did something kind and handed it to him and fed one person. But he thought, what if Jesus can do something more with this little bit, not even enough to even consider meeting the need? What if Jesus can do something? So this little boy walks up to him and says, can you do something with this? With this little bit that I have, can you do something? I've seen you do some miracles. I've seen you, like you seem to represent God. You seem to be this amazing. Can you do something with this? And that's exactly how I felt in that moment where I found out that my mom had kicked Josh out and said, I'm going to give him up for adoption. And Josh had this massive need. Massive hole in his heart, massive, emotional, spiritual need, but then also this real, physical, practical need. He didn't have anything, and the problem was, neither did I. I didn't have anything. I didn't have the money. I was living on campus somewhere else, didn't have enough money for food for him, didn't have anything, and I found myself in this place where I said, I can't meet this need. But what do you do? And so I prayed and I said, God, is there any way that you can take the mess that I have? Because, listen, I was barely out of being a teenager myself. I was 23 years old. What am I going to do? And yet I said to God, God, is there any way you can take the little bit that I have and do something here to meet this immense, immense need? And so we decided that he was going to come and live with us. He came and lived on campus. And again, how do you raise a teenager on a good day? Now I'm like there trying to figure this out. He's a teenager, and he was a real teenager, okay? He was a real teenager trying to figure this out. I didn't know what I was doing. And then a few months later, I meet Kristen, my wife. And now she, imagine her. Hey, I'm starting to like this guy, but who's that? Do you come with a 14-year-old? Yeah, I'm sorry, I do. And yet she decided to continue the relationship, and we eventually got married, fell in love, got married, and she chose to step into the situation going, we don't have enough to get. I remember a conversation I had with Kristen as we were deciding, are we going to get married? And I told her, I said, Kristen, you need to know something before you commit to this relationship. You need to know, I don't work for money. And she looked at me and she said, neither do I. I work for the love and the passion of what I do. And I said, no, you don't understand. I don't get money for what I do. And it was because I didn't. And yet she married me. I mean, she's a saint. Married into that situation and said, okay, I will join this and give the little that we have. When we got married, thankfully, we're so grateful to this. Thankfully, and it's amazing how it seems like God sort of looks at us and winks and says, you willing to give just a little bit? I'll help. I'll make something of this. But when we got married, some friends of ours had the studio apartment above the garage on their property, and they said we could live there for free, because we didn't have any money. And so we had the studio apartment, the bed was here, the desk was here, the kitchen was here, and the living room was there. It was all one big area. And Josh could continue to stay on campus just down the road, and we can continue to do this, but we had this space, which was amazing, and we're so grateful to that. But then the school had to move, and we were going to stay in Johannesburg at the time. And once again, Josh had no place to go. Once again, there was a situation where we go, Josh, it'll be a little awkward for him to live in our studio apartment. How's that going to work? Just a little awkward. And then I remember Kristen saying something and praying something, and she said, if only we had another bedroom. If we had another bedroom, then we could do this thing, and I'm willing. I've got 2 fish and 5 loaves, not even enough for us, but God, is there any way you can take what we have and do something? And you can't make this stuff up, I'm telling you. 2 or 3 weeks later, after she said that, we got this call from an acquaintance who we'd had dinner with. We knew the guy, but he had no idea of what we were going through. And he said, hey, this is weird, but I have this investment property that I don't know if you can, but would you mind moving into my 3-bedroom house for free? And we were like, we'll pray about it. No, yes, totally. Like, seriously, how on earth does that happen? And right there in that moment, it was as if God winked at us again, saying, give me your 2 fish, give me your 5 loaves, and I will do something that you will never be able to do. And Josh was able to move in with us. Now listen, I just want to let you know, again, we didn't have the finances. At that stage, I was making less than minimum wage, just enough to feed us. So Josh actually had to get a job as a waiter to add to the budget so that he could live with us. I mean, poor guy, he's a teenager. He has to pay rent to stay with us, but that's all we had. We didn't have enough to give the guy. And yet we said, God, can you do something with this? Also, I want you to know that we were still broken and trying to figure it out. Our first 5 years of our marriage were a mess. We didn't know what we were doing. We would fight and, create a bit of awkwardness. Josh was like, what on earth is going on here? One time, and the reason I tell you this is because I want you to know that we didn't have enough money. We didn't have a house. We were given this house, crazy. But we didn't have enough inside us to be a positive and a huge good influence in complete way for Josh. We had a fight, and I got so mad that I actually kicked our bathtub so hard, I kicked a hole in the thing. And it was cast iron. No, it wasn't cast iron. I wish. I'd feel good about myself after that. But the reality is, we were a mess. We didn't have enough to give. And somehow it was like God looked at us and said, give me what you have. Don't try to give Josh what you have, because if you give Josh what you have, it's not going to be enough. Give me what you have. And allow me to do something with this and see what happens. If you grew up in church, you know the end. You probably know the end of the story. And I love to picture these stories. It just brings reality to it. I can imagine this little boy. I mean, he's standing in the crowd, wide-eyed, the disciple. It's one of the disciples, and this is Jesus. And all I've got is this, and everybody's around. Everybody's hungry. Everybody's angry. And he comes and he goes, Jesus, you can take this? And I can imagine Jesus getting down on his knees saying, come on, taking this bread, taking these 2 fish and going, watch this. And this little boy is going, And he looks up to heaven, he thanks God, he blesses it, and then he starts to break this food and starts handing it out to the disciples. And they start handing it out. And the boy's looking at his hands and he's going, What's going on? But he kept going, and he kept going, and he kept going, and somehow, miraculously, God took the almost nothing that this kid gave him, and he somehow did something to meet this huge need that no one could meet. God took the little and did something incredible. John ends the story like this. He says, they all ate and were satisfied. Why? Because a little kid who had basically nothing said, can you do something with this? Now let me ask this question, same question I've been asking, but put a different emphasis on it. What does that do to a person? What does that do to a child? Imagine this kid going, did you see that? Did you see what happened? Oh my gosh, that kid's life would have been changed forever, because he said, wow, can God really do that and change someone, do all this crazy stuff with the little bit that I gave? What does that do to a child? What does that do to a person? And that's exactly how, in the midst of the craziness and the mess, we didn't think we were helping, but we kept pursuing God. We kept doing our best to follow Jesus, doing our best to figure out our marriage and go, God, help us help him. We don't know how to do this, but God, would you please help? And it was a mess and it was hard, but eventually Josh graduated. And his relationship with God kind of took a dive because of the example of, his mom who, was a Christian home. He said that, and he didn't want anything to do with God because it felt like God never showed up. And so he did his thing, and he kind of went through ups and downs, made some dumb decisions, but also made some great decisions. And eventually, through different scenarios, different people he met, he discovered a real picture of who Jesus was, and it was nothing like the God that he felt had abandoned him. It was a God that ran towards the mess that he was in, and it began to change him. And as he did that, he started building his life and got to the place where he had a good job, a stable life from the mess that he grew up in. Had a good job and a stable life. Here's a picture of him as an adult. And I look at that and I go, my word, I could not be prouder. And then he met someone named Olivia. And they started dating and they fell in love and they eventually got married. Here's Olivia and Josh. And I look at this and I go, wow. And Josh asked me if I would officiate his wedding. And so I went back to South Africa and I was able to officiate this wedding. And I'm standing there going, wow. God, that you were able to bring Josh out of that and put him where he's at now in a healthy relationship. And that I was able to, and Kristen and I were able to be a small part of that. We did not have enough to help him. If we did that on our own, we would have messed it up more. I'm telling you. But we somehow got to be a part of seeing Josh get to the place where he stood there, starting a healthy marriage. And I'm telling you, if this was the end of the story, I would be so grateful that I got to be a part of that incredible story just by going, we don't have enough, we inside of us, we don't have enough practically, but God, can you do something with this little broken mess that we're giving? I'd be so grateful that we did that to see where Josh was standing. But the crazy thing is, this is not the end of the story. Because 2 years ago, Josh called me. I was sitting in my office here. And he called me and he said, Justin, you're not going to believe this. And I can't go into the details of how it all fits together. But there is a 6.5-year-old boy who was abandoned by his parents when he was born, has been living in the foster care system for the last 6 years. Rejected by his dad, rejected by his mom. And now, the foster mother who's been looking after him for 6 years says, I'm done, you're out. And the 6.5-year-old boy has nowhere to go. And Josh is telling me this and saying, I think we need to take him in. And I'm bawling on the side here in Tampa, going, I can't believe this. What is going on? And here's the little boy. His name is Atandile. And Josh and Olivia decided to adopt Atandile. And I'm sitting there going, what on earth is happening 14 years after we did something and didn't have enough? Said, yeah, let's help. And now Josh, 14 years later, is saying, we don't have enough to help this little kid. We don't have enough, but we feel like we need to. I'm bawling, I'm crying. I asked Josh in our Skype conversation if he would share some of the feelings that he had. So here's a little clip of Josh sharing how they made this decision.
So when Olivia and I were thinking, praying, and talking about taking in Atandile, God put something on my heart, and that was the fact that 14 years prior to that, Justin was in exactly the same position as I was. He had very little to give, but he gave what he could, and he trusted in God for the rest. God used him in such a profound way, and I just feel like if God allowed me to go through that, for Justin and Kristen to do what they did, for Olivia and I to do what we're doing, then it was all worth it.
I look at that and the words he said, then it was all worth it. Kristen and I both, we would go back and do it again. It was incredibly hard. We didn't have enough, but somehow God was able to take something and not only help and change Josh, but now help and change another life and give this kid hope where there is no hope, help where there is no help, love where he's been rejected over and over again, and his little life is being changed completely. I want to introduce you to Atandile. He's 8 years old now, and I got him to say, I had to bribe him with a Transformer car that he would speak on the video, but hey, we did that. It's on its way over to South Africa right now, but he wants to say hello to you and say where he's at right now, so watch this video.
Hello people in America, my name is Atandile, and I just want to tell you that I love my mom and dad very much, and that I'm happy to be part of the Grunewald team.
That'd be you.
Good job, big boy. Thank you.
That he's happy to be part of the Grindelwald team. And I look at that, and another question comes to mind for me. What does that do to this person? To know that I got to be a little part of this makes me go, come on, I will do it over and over and over again. I know that if I gave him me and my broken story and the mess that I have, it would have been worse. I was in the story, it would have been worse. But somehow, through the mess of my life growing up, I was able to see that in the brokenness, Jesus, as he always does, runs toward the brokenness, runs toward the mess. And he did that for me and said, hey, I can do something with the mess that you have. And so we said, okay. And God somehow took the little bit that we had, and changed Josh's life. And I know God could have done it anyway. And I know that God was pursuing Josh anyway. And I don't want to take any of the credit that's not due, because God used different people in different stages, and it was amazing, and I'm so grateful. But I got to be a part of it. And that changed me. And it made me go, I want to do that again. I want to see people help. I want to take my broken story and allow God to come in and use my broken story to bring hope and help and love and light. What does that do to this person? And the reason I ask this is because I want to look at all of us, and I want to say, when we take the little that we have that's not even enough for our own selves sometimes, and we choose to not give it to someone because then it's not enough, but choose to give it to Jesus and say, would you do something with this? Can you do something with this? It changes us. And to see Atandile go, I am so happy to be part of the Grindelwald team, makes me go, seriously, how on earth did we get to be a part of this story? So, that's the This Is Us series. And my hope is that in this series you have discovered and you have seen very, very clearly that none of us is ideal. None of us are perfect. All of us are broken to a degree. All of us have brokenness in us because that's part of living in a broken world. But what we've discovered is that Jesus continually runs toward us no matter who the us is. And when he runs toward us, if we are willing to say, okay, I'll engage, he is willing to come and bring light to a broken heart, bring light to a broken story, bring hope and help and love. And then, as today's story shows, gosh, I hope this comes across. As today's story shows, he can take a broken story, a broken situation that's not enough in and of itself, and take that and use that to bring light and hope and help and love to another broken story that can change them. And then he can take that broken story and use it to bring light and hope and help and love to another broken story. And I can't wait for 14 years from now to see what Atandile is doing. I'm telling you, I am so glad we said, even though we don't have enough, will you take what we have and do something with it? Can you take what we have and do something with it? I'm so glad to be part of a church that is willing to talk about the mess and include Jesus in the mess and then offer his hope in the mess to others out there. So, we're going to end this whole series in a very unique and fun way. I'm actually going to ask all the people who told their story in the series so far, and if you haven't heard the stories, you need to go online and listen to it, but I'm going to ask all the people who told their stories to come on up on stage, and we're going to do something I think, that represents who we are and who we want to be. But as they come up, what's going to happen is our guest services team is also going to hand out a candle to everybody. They're going to grab a candle, and everybody's going to get a candle here in the auditorium. But there's something unique about this candle. The candle is going to be a broken candle, representing the fact that none of us are ideal, that we all have broken stories. But the unique thing about a broken candle is that when light is given to that candle, it can still burn. The broken candle can still burn brightly. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to pray, and then just because they shared their story publicly, they're going to light a candle, and they're going to come and light all of your candles. So you guys can come down, and you can start handing the candles out so that everybody has that. Then we're going to sing a song, and I just want us to enjoy this moment and let it represent our stories. Let it represent the reality that even though we're broken, Jesus runs toward us, wants to bring light, hope, love, and help. And then wants to use us in our brokenness with the broken candle to help bring light, hope, and love to others. The reality is that God wants to use your broken story to bring hope to others. Let me pray, and then we'll sing. Father, thank you so much that you don't expect wholeness, you don't expect perfection. You knew that we couldn't do that. That's why Jesus came and died for us, because he was the only one who was perfect. He was the only one who was whole. Jesus, I am so grateful that in my brokenness, you brought light. You brought love, you brought hope, and you brought help. And I'm so grateful that somehow you were able to use my brokenness to bring hope to others. And I'm so grateful that that hope lit a heart in some ways. I had a small little part, not the whole part, but a small little part. And that hope is bringing light and hope to Atandile and others as well. Thank you so much. And God, would you allow us to realize that in our brokenness, you approach us, want to bring light, and you want to use us in others as well. Pray that in Jesus' name.